Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're doing a deep dive into New Zealand's incredibly rapid 800-year evolution. We're talking about the journey from the world's last unsettled major landmass all the way to a thriving, multicultural nation. You know, when you think of history, you probably imagine ancient empires spanning millennia, right? But New Zealand's human story is phenomenally compressed. We're going to look at exactly how successive waves of migration from all over the world shaped an entire civilization in literally just a matter of centuries. So let's dive right into the core mystery of our explainer. How did such a geographically isolated place, we're talking thousands of miles of ocean from the nearest landmasses, experience this hyper-compressed timeline of human migration and integration? It went from a set of completely uninhabited islands less than 1,000 years ago into one of the absolute most sought-after destinations on Earth today. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be moving chronologically through 6 distinct eras, starting with the first settlers, moving to the arrival of Europeans, early treaties and conflicts, the growth of the colony, the world wars, and finally, modern New Zealand. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the first settlers, and the last frontier of human migration.
Our story begins with the Great Polynesian Expansion, which happened between 1250 and 1300. This broader movement saw absolutely incredible journeys across the entire Pacific Ocean. Picture this. These awe-inspiring navigators used massive ocean-going canoes known as waka. They were renowned for their complete mastery of the stars and the ocean currents. Using these waka, they traversed vast open oceans to settle the land they called Aotearoa, eventually becoming the ancestors of the Maori people. But they didn't just stop there. This exact same navigational genius allowed them to reach as far afield as Hawaii, Easter Island, and possibly even South America.
Now, what's really fascinating is how these early Maori settlers formed the backbone of a complex polytheistic culture. They organized their communities around tribes known as iwi, which were strictly defined by bloodlines and shared ancestry. Alongside this, they developed Huakapapa, which is an incredibly sophisticated system of oral traditions. This wasn't just a basic family tree, it was a deep genealogical history connecting individuals directly to their ancestors, the land, and their spiritual beliefs. It's kind of like the ultimate cultural fabric.
And Maori society grew sophisticated really quickly. Communities lived in fortified villages called pa, constructed on elevated land for defense and serving as social hubs for feasts and ceremonies. They held deep polytheistic spiritual beliefs that maintained a strict balance with the natural world. Social status was visibly marked by tattoos, and they were led by dynamic chiefs known as rangatira. But here's the catch. A rangatira's authority wasn't absolute. It relied heavily on social cohesion, consensus, and especially martial prowess, mostly because fierce competition over land and resources led to constant intertribal warfare. Because early Māori society didn't possess metalworking technology, psychological intimidation became just as vital as physical combat. Their highly skilled warriors, or toa, used hand-to-hand weapons primarily made of wood, bone, and stone. So they adapted the haka, a ceremonial dance, into a psychological weapon used right before battle. It was specifically designed to intimidate opponents and showcase the fierce, unbreakable unity of the tribe.
Moving right along to Section 2, the arrival of Europeans and the collision of worlds.
So, for hundreds of years, life in Aotearoa remained largely unchanged, but that extreme isolation abruptly ended starting in 1642 with Dutch explorer Abel Tasman. His ships anchored in what is now Golden Bay, but the encounter quickly turned violent, resulting in the deaths of 4 of his crew in a skirmish. Tasman left without even making landfall, but he mapped the area as Nova Zealandia. Fast forward over 100 years to 1769, and British Captain James Cook arrives aboard the HMS Endeavour. Cook spent considerable time meticulously mapping the islands and developing relations with the Maori. By the early 1800s, this totally paved the way for whalers, merchants trading iron tools for flax and timber, and missionaries establishing settlements. Some sailors and escaped convicts even integrated into tribes, becoming known as Pekaha Māori, or European Maori.
Now I want you to really think about this next number, 20,000 to 40,000. While early trade was mostly peaceful, passing traders introduced one highly sought-after commodity, guns. And this triggered the devastating musket wars from 1806 to 1845. It was a massive intertribal arms race for European firearms used to gain territory or seek revenge. Across nearly 3,000 battles, an estimated 20,000 to 40,000 people died. It was a tragedy that permanently and dramatically altered the tribal makeup of New Zealand in just a few short decades.
Which brings us to Section 3,
treaties and conflicts, and sovereignty in question.
By the late 1830s, unregulated European settlement was causing severe friction, prompting the British government to step in. This intervention resulted in the Treaty of Waitangi, signed on February 6, 1840, by Captain William Hobson and about 40 Maori chiefs. This is the foundational constitutional document of New Zealand. However, and this is absolutely crucial, it was written in two very different versions. The English version formally established British sovereignty, while the Maori version focused on granting and protecting the rights of the indigenous people. Literally lost in translation, these differing documents led directly to profound, long-lasting disputes over interpretation and who truly held sovereignty over the land.
You know, when you have two completely different ideas of who owns what, European agriculture versus Maori territorial control, violence is almost inevitable. The New Zealand Wars of the 1860s saw 18,000 British and Allied troops battle against a determined force of 5,000 Maori resistance fighters. By 1872, British forces prevailed, confiscating a staggering 6,000 square miles of Maori land. This massive seizure left a really heavy legacy of bitterness and resentment that continues to be felt and addressed to this very day.
All right, on to Section 4, a growing colony, progress and portraiture.
Following its official separation from the colony of New South Wales in 1841, New Zealand witnessed a dramatic surge of European immigrants driven by the prospect of owning land and building a prosperous new life. The colony modernized at lightning speed. By 1852, a central elected government was established. The 1850s and 60s brought massive wealth through sheep farming and sweeping gold rushes, causing the population to actually double in just 4 years between 1859 and 1863. Under Prime Minister Julius Vogel, a massive public works policy laid down railways and telegraph lines. And politically, under Prime Minister Richard Seddon's Liberal government, New Zealand established a comprehensive welfare state and, get this, in 1893 became the very first country in the entire world to enact universal female suffrage, a real game changer.
Actually, amidst all this crazy expansion, migrants were arriving from all across the world. One such migrant was Gottfried Lindauer, a trained artist from Bohemia who arrived in 1874. He dedicated himself to painting prominent Maori chiefs and their families. His Maori portraits accurately preserve the intricate details of traditional facial tattoos, clothing, and weapons. It's basically a vital visual time capsule of a traditional way of life that might have otherwise been entirely lost to history.
Next up, Section 5, Wars and Independence, stepping onto the world stage. So, the 20th century rolls around, and discussions about independence really start to grow. Interestingly, New Zealand outright rejected the idea of unifying with neighboring Australia, deciding instead to forge its own path. Let's look at how that identity was forged. In 1907, New Zealand achieved Dominion status, granting it domestic political independence. However, its constitutional ties to Britain meant its foreign policy was still controlled by London. Because of this, when World War I broke out in 1914, New Zealand forces immediately deployed, successfully seizing German Samoa. In 1939, they entered World War II, raising an enormous military force of over 150,000 servicemen and providing vital supplies to Britain, despite facing a much closer threat from the Empire of Japan in the Pacific.
But, you know, that independence didn't come cheap. During the First World War, New Zealand sent around 100,000 soldiers overseas as part of the famous Anzac Corps. Over 18,000 of these soldiers died in brutal campaigns like Gallipoli, the Middle East, and the Western Front. This profound sacrifice is widely credited by historians with securing the true psychological independence of the nation, forever binding the country together in collective memory.
And finally, Section 6, Modern New Zealand, a unique global destination. After the dust settled from World War II, the post-war era irreversibly changed New Zealand's relationship with Britain. Recognizing new geopolitical realities, the nation shifted its strategic focus away from Europe and towards the Pacific and Asia. Let's see how this pivot built the nation we see today. Initially, New Zealand turned to the United States for security, even committing troops to the controversial Vietnam War. But they soon grew fully independent in their foreign policy. In 1986, they boldly declared a total anti-nuclear stance. They literally said no to nukes, which led to their suspension from the ANZUS Security Treaty. Domestically, immigration was heavily liberalized, bringing an influx of migrants from Asia and Australia, rapidly diversifying the country's demographics far beyond its British roots.
At the exact same time, something incredible was happening. The country experienced the Maori Renaissance. During this period, the Māori people actively worked to reverse the historical decline of their culture and language. This dedicated movement shifted attitudes across the entire country, embedding indigenous rights into modern political life and successfully making the Māori language an official state language in 1987. This vital step really cemented the nation's unique dual identity.
So, to wrap up today's explainer, consider this thought from our sources. New Zealand has offered a way of life that simply cannot be found anywhere else. It went from completely uninhabited waters to a dynamic global presence in just 8 centuries. So the question to leave you with is this: how will this beautiful, culturally rich nation, forged by 800 years of incredibly rapid and diverse migration, continue to shape its unique identity in the centuries to come? Thank you so much for exploring the history of New Zealand with us. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.